G'day and welcome back to Project 300. One area where the 300 series suffers compared to the 200 is in the fitment of larger wheels and tyres. You can fit some pretty big rubber under the 200 without the need for flares, but that is not the case with the 300 series. Even running a perfectly legal wheel and tyre combination like these ROH 18x9s with 33x12.5 tyres, you can see that they protrude outside the factory guards, which will probably result in stone damage, not to mention inviting unwanted attention from the highway patrol. On the upside though, installing flares is relatively easy because it's just a matter of removing the 300's factory plastic trims and replacing them with a set of flares. There are a few different flare options available for the 300 now, but most don't really solve the legality problem because they taper in at the bottom and retain the factory mud flaps. Fortunately, Overland Tourers Australia have now come to the rescue with a new Australian-made flare kit, which not only offers some great looks, but also some big technical advantages as well. The OTA flares are full width right to the ends, so there's no question over legality, and the kit also includes wider mud flaps to provide better protection against mud and stones being thrown onto the bodywork. If you run 35-inch tyres, they also make a variation of the front mud flaps to prevent scrubbing. Perhaps the best feature of the OTA flares though is that they produce end caps and templates so that you can trim the flares to suit front and rear bar work, then cap the cut ends so they look perfectly integrated. So much neater than having raw cut ends or having to hide them under pieces of pinch weld. The OTA flares can be left black or they can be colour coded to match the car. At this stage I'm going to leave them black, at least until I've installed the front and rear bars, at which point I'll need to cut and cap them. I'll decide then whether to colour code them at the same time or leave them black permanently. As you've seen, I've already fitted the new wheels and tyres, so let's get the 300 legal again by installing the OTA flare kit. Before you begin, open the box and scan the QR code to get the printed instructions, just in case there have been any changes since this video was made. Keep opening the box and double check that all the components are there, including the 6 flare pieces, 4 mud flaps, edge trim, torque screws and washers, and also any end caps and templates if you've ordered them. Next, assemble the tools you'll need. A cordless drill with 3mm bit, small and large flat blade screwdrivers, a trim removal tool if you've got one, a 4mm Allen key, and a Torx T20 driver. Start the installation at the front of the car. The factory wheel arch trims are each secured by 5 removable clips. Plus there are 2 4mm Allen head screws located near the bends around the top of the trim. First remove the 5 clips. This is done by levering open the centre section of each clip, then pulling the entire clip out of the hole. You can use a trim removal tool like this, or alternatively a flat blade screwdriver. Retain all the clips for reuse on the new flares. Once you've removed the 5 clips, use a 4mm Allen key to remove the 2 screws. Again, retain the screws for reuse later. With all of these clips and screws out, it's time to remove the factory trim from the vehicle. It's still held in place by spring clips and can be removed by pulling outwards from the vehicle. This is best done with just your hands and fingers, starting at the rear end of the trim and working your way up and around towards the front. Once you get to the last 10 cm or so of the trim, use a large flat blade screwdriver to lever off the 2 remaining clips, holding the trim to the front bumper. Double check that all of the clips have come out of the guard, and if not, remove any remaining clips using a trim tool. Next, get a damp cloth and wipe any dirt or dust off the paintwork where the trim was sitting. Get the appropriate side front flare from the box, plus one of the long pre-cut rubber trim pieces. Starting at one end, fit the rubber trim over the top edge of the flare. To allow for variable length due to expansion and contraction, I suggest first doing 20 cm or so at one end, then line up the rubber at the other end and work back towards the middle as shown. This method will ensure that both ends are correct, and the rubber can stretch to suit as you fit it over the flare. Next, carefully align the flare onto the car, lining up the mounting points. Then refit the 5 factory mounting clips into the original holes by pushing the clip into the hole, then depressing the centre locking section to secure each clip. Once you have the 5 clips installed, get the supplied plastic spacers from the fitting kit and insert them between the tabs on the flares and the inner guard, Then refit the 2 original screws into their holes. Don't over tighten as they're only going into plastic receivers. We can now replace the factory mud flap with the new larger mud flap supplied with the kit. I've removed the front tyre for recording purposes, but there's no need to do so as there is sufficient room. Begin by removing the 3 Allen key screws on the front face of the mud flap. Don't discard the screws as they'll be reused on the new mud flaps. Then, using either a trim tool or a flat blade screwdriver, remove the retaining clip on the underside of the lip. It's the same style of clip as used on the Flares. Take the new mud flap and align it into position. Insert the 3 original screws finger tight, then insert the retaining clip under the lip. You can then tighten the 3 screws using an Allen key, but don't over tighten them. This completes the installation of the front flare kit. Repeat the installation on the other side of the vehicle. Now it's time to move on to the rear flares. These are also secured by clips and screws, but most of the clips are much smaller and require careful removal with a small flat blade screwdriver. Remove the 3 small clips on the door trim and the single small clip on the body trim using the small flat blade. Then remove the large clip on the body using a trim tool or flat blade screwdriver. Next, remove the single screw on the door trim and the single screw on the body trim using an Allen key. Keep all the clips and screws for reuse on the new Flares. Starting at the rear of the door trim, pull the trim straight off the vehicle in the same way as the front trims. There are 5 clips securing this section. If any remain on the door, carefully remove them with a trim tool. Then repeat the process with the body trim, starting at the door edge and working towards the rear. There are 7 clips in this section. As with the front Flares, clean the paintwork using soapy water and a cloth before continuing. Apply the supplied rubber trims to the top edge of each flare. For the rear flare sets, these rubbers only have a 45-degree cut at one end. For the door flare, the 45-degree cut sits at the front edge of the flare, while for the body flare, the 45-degree cut goes to the rear. For the door flare, remove one of the red clips from the factory trim and attach it to the new flare as shown. Now it's time to fit the new rear flare kits. Start by aligning the door flare into position and refitting one of the small original clips into the bottom hole. Then guide the red body clip into position and clip it into place. Next, refit the remaining 2 small clips into the holes in the top and the corner of the flare as shown. Then take the original Allen key mounting screw and insert it into the mounting hole and secure. This is only screwing into plastic, so don't over tighten. Next, get the cordless drill with 3mm bit and drill out the 2 additional mounting points through the elongated holes in the flare. Use a T20 Torx driver to install 2 of the supplied Torx screws into the holes. Again, don't over tighten as these are only going into plastic. Now it's time to move on to the rear body flare. Align the flare into position, then refit the small original body clip to the front end of the flare and the large original body clip to the bottom of the flare. You can then refit the original screw to the corner of the flare using the 4mm Allen key and tighten. Moving on now to the rear mud flap. Remove the single body clip using a trim tool or flat blade screwdriver. Then remove the 3 screws using a 4mm Allen key. There's 1 screw on the front face near the body clip and 2 screws on the rear underside of the mud flap. Don't discard the clips or screws. It's easiest to fit the rear mud flap with the rear tyre removed from the vehicle. Align the new mud flap into position. Install one of the original screws and lightly secure, then refit the original body clip into place. Hold the mud flap so that it's straight and aligned, then take the cordless drill with the 3mm bit and drill through the provided hole on the inside of the mud flap into the plastic behind. You can then refit one of the original screws into this hole and secure. Don't over tighten. Well, that concludes the fitment of the OTA Flare Kit for the LandCruiser 300. It's an extremely easy DIY install with a completion time of under an hour. You can find a list of the required tools on the instruction sheet or on the Project 300 website, along with a series of before and after photos. In combination with the new wheels and tyres, the Flares absolutely transform the look of the 300. The design and manufacturing quality is first rate, and they could easily be mistaken for being a factory accessory. As I mentioned earlier, I'll be leaving the Flares black for now and decide whether to paint them once I cut and cap the Flares to suit bar work. For a guide to cutting and capping, keep an eye out for the bull bar and rear bar videos once they're available. Please follow the build at project300.com.au, where you'll find a growing number of free guides for modifying and maintaining a LandCruiser 300, including links to find all the correct parts and service items. See you next time.